But it didn't happen because I threw him over the table.
Okay, was that in retaliation for what he did?
Yeah.
Okay. And had he fell a little bit over, he would have been dead?
Yeah.
Okay. Were you trying to kill him?
Yeah.
You just heard a wrestler admit to attempted murder on camera, and that's not even the craziest thing you'll witness today. From shattered skulls and torn muscles to crowds so hostile they hijacked entire WrestleMania main events, these are the matches that went catastrophically wrong. Buckle up, because some of these disasters will leave you speechless. New Jack versus Vic Grimes. When it comes to terrifying moments in wrestling history, few can match the sheer brutality that unfolded between New Jack and Vic Grimes at ECW Living Dangerously 2000. This scaffold match was supposed to be the pinnacle of ECW's hardcore style, a high-stakes spectacle that would have fans on the edge of their seats. But what transpired was far more sinister than anyone anticipated. The volatile New Jack harbored real-life animosity stemming from a prior incident where Grimes allegedly caused him a concussion, and this personal grudge was about to turn a wrestling match into a near-death experience. The two competitors found themselves perched atop a 20-foot scaffold with stacked tables waiting below. The plan was straightforward. Both men would plummet together through those tables, but Grimes hesitated. Whether it was fear or self-preservation, that moment of hesitation changed everything. New Jack, fueled by rage and desire for revenge, grabbed Grimes and hurled him off that scaffold unilaterally, without any coordination.
But it didn't happen because I threw him over the table.
Okay, was that in retaliation for what he did?
Yeah.
Okay. And had he fell a little bit over, he would have been dead?
Yeah.
Okay. Were you trying to kill him?
Yeah.
The aftermath was horrific. Grimes missed the tables entirely and landed awkwardly on New Jack's head, cracking New Jack's skull on the concrete arena floor. New Jack suffered severe brain trauma, bleeding on the brain, permanent vision loss in his right eye, and lasting nerve damage affecting his behavior for years. He required 23 stitches and immediate hospitalization, while Grimes escaped with relatively minor injuries. The match ended in complete medical chaos, and controversy surrounding whether New Jack intentionally tried to harm Grimes became the subject of heated debate. This incident was featured in New Jack's Dark Side of the Ring episode, where he showed no remorse. The feud continued, reigniting in XPW 2 years later with another scaffold spot involving a taser, cementing their rivalry as one of wrestling's most dangerous. Speaking of legendary matches that pushed the boundaries of what the human body could endure, our next catastrophic encounter brings us to perhaps the most famous cell match in wrestling history. Mankind versus The Undertaker. The Hell in a Cell match at King of the Ring 1998 between Mankind, Mick Foley, and The Undertaker is often celebrated as one of the greatest matches ever, but it's also one of the most catastrophic spectacles ever witnessed. What was billed as a brutal enclosure match started with Mankind atop the 16-foot structure, taunting The Undertaker, setting the stage for what would become one of the most talked-about moments in sports entertainment. But nobody could have predicted the absolute carnage about to unfold. The catastrophe began almost immediately when The Undertaker threw Foley off the cell roof, sending him crashing through the Spanish announce table below in what was actually a planned spot. But even planned spots can go horribly wrong, and the impact dislocated Foley's jaw, bruised his kidneys, and caused internal bleeding. Any reasonable person would have stayed down after such devastating trauma, but Mick Foley was no ordinary performer. Driven by sheer determination and, as he would later admit, his own ego, Foley climbed back up to the top of that cell structure.
And this is when I talked about that ego coming into play. You know, I said it like in this, I don't know what it was. There was like something larger than the two of us out there. The truth is, it was my ego taking offense to anyone, even The Undertaker, telling me when it was time to go home.
What happened next was completely unplanned and terrifying. The Undertaker executed a chokeslam on Mankind, but the cell's roof panel gave way unexpectedly, sending Foley crashing to the mat below alongside a steel chair that knocked out a tooth, which lodged in his nose, and concussed him severely. Despite being stretchered out, Foley returned, enduring thumbtacks and more punishment before losing. Foley required hospitalization and suffered long-term back and neck issues. He later revealed in his autobiography biography, "Have a nice day," that these falls shortened his career significantly. Controversies included WWE's safety lapses, The Undertaker wrestled with a broken foot, and debates over whether such risks glorified violence, eventually influencing the company's PG era shift. Speaking of McMahon family members putting their bodies on the line recklessly, our next disaster involves the boss's son taking a fall nobody should ever attempt. Shane McMahon versus Steve Blackman. Shane McMahon has built an entire reputation on risking life and limb for wrestling fans, but his hardcore championship defense against Steve Blackman at SummerSlam 2000 took those death-defying tendencies to an absolutely insane level. This no-holds-barred brawl saw Shane, the non-wrestler son of WWE's boss, defending his championship against the martial artist Steve Blackman. What should have been a straightforward hardcore match turned into one of the most terrifying moments in SummerSlam history. The disaster reached its peak when Shane climbed the 40-foot Titantron scaffolding to flee from his opponent, with the relentless Blackman pursuing him every step of the way. Blackman struck Shane repeatedly with a kendo stick, raining down blow after blow on the boss's son, while both men clung to the structure high above the arena floor. What happened next was absolutely sickening to witness. Shane plummeted backward from that incredible height onto a crash pad positioned below, but the fall was so high and so awkward that the minimal padding could barely absorb the impact. Shane suffered a concussion, severe back trauma, and internal bruising from the fall. Blackman later recounted how Shane insisted on the spot despite obvious risks, and the crash pad was minimal, leading to a sickening thud audible on television. Shane continued briefly but was visibly dazed. Blackman won with an elbow drop from the structure, but the victory was overshadowed by concern for Shane's well-being. Shane's hospitalization highlighted his daredevil persona, but sparked controversy about nepotism. Critics argued he risked his life for pops, while trained wrestlers avoided such stunts. The drama compounded when Blackman suffered a migraine after the match from a botched kick. Speaking of massive falls from tremendous heights, our next disaster features another cell match where a 400-pound man took a plunge that would haunt him for years. Rikishi in the six-man Hell in a Cell. The six-man Hell in a Cell match at Armageddon 2000 was a chaotic free-for-all cramming six of WWE's biggest names: Kurt Angle, The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Triple H, The Undertaker, and Rikishi into one demonic structure for a WWE Championship match. With so many legendary competitors in one cell, something was bound to go wrong, and the disaster centered on the massive Samoan superstar Rikishi. What was supposed to be a highlight reel moment became a cautionary tale about the physical toll professional wrestling can take on the human body. The spot that would define this match's place in disaster history came when The Undertaker chokeslammed the 400-pound Rikishi off the cell roof into a truck bed filled with sawdust and hay. The fall was planned and was supposed to be a spectacular moment that fans would talk about for years, and they certainly have, but not for the reasons WWE intended. The fall was botched slightly, with Rikishi landing off-center and compressing his spine upon impact. The damage was significant and would cause him intense back pain that plagued him for years to come. Rikishi later admitted the impact felt like death, and his family nearly divorced him over the risk, with his wife furious at his sacrifice for a paycheck. The match halted as medics rushed to check on him. Controversies included last-minute changes, Rikishi regretted not adjusting the truck's position, and debates about WWE pressuring larger performers into dangerous spots. These injuries contributed to Rikishi's early retirement. Kurt Angle retained amid the mayhem, but the fall overshadowed the match. Speaking of impromptu matches that went catastrophically wrong, our next disaster involves a quadriceps muscle, a host named Snoop Dogg, and the biggest wrestling event of the year: The Miz vs. Shane McMahon. WrestleMania is supposed to be the showcase of the immortals, where dreams come true and legends are made. But sometimes, even the biggest event in wrestling can produce moments of absolute embarrassment, and the impromptu match between The Miz and Shane McMahon at WrestleMania 39 was precisely that. When host Snoop Dogg announced this surprise bout, the crowd was excited to see Shane McMahon back in a WWE ring. Nobody anticipated the entire thing would collapse into a farce within mere seconds. Disaster struck just 15 seconds into the match when Shane attempted a simple leapfrog, but upon landing, his quadriceps muscle tore completely, leaving him immobile and writhing in visible pain on the canvas. The match, such as it was, immediately fell apart. What was supposed to be a fun celebrity-adjacent segment became an exercise in damage control and improvisation.
I was telling the referee, I was like, hey, play someone's music. I don't care whose music it is. Hit the finisher. Have Snoop Dogg hit me with a Snoop Dogg elbow. And so I get all of a sudden I turn around and Snoop Dogg sucker punches me.
Snoop Dogg improvised brilliantly, punching The Miz twice and then pinning him with a people's elbow to salvage something from the segment. But the damage was done. Shane McMahon required surgery and months of recovery, eerily echoing a similar injury that his father Vince McMahon had suffered years earlier. The catastrophe exposed WWE's reliance on aging part-timers who may not be in peak physical condition. Controversies arose over Shane's conditioning and whether the spot was rushed without proper preparation. Wrestling analyst Stevie Richards later examined the leapfrog mechanics and suggested it was a preventable error with proper warm-up and technique. The Miz later praised everyone's adaptability in salvaging the segment, but fans rightfully decried it as one of the most embarrassing moments in WrestleMania history. Speaking of WrestleMania matches that left crowds absolutely furious, our next disaster features two departing superstars and a hostile New York audience. Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar. On paper, Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania Dix should have been a dream match. Two of the most physically imposing competitors in wrestling history, with Stone Cold Steve Austin as special guest referee. The promotional hype was enormous, but what transpired was one of the most disastrous and hostile matches ever broadcast, imploding not because of physical injuries or botched spots, but because of something far worse: backstage politics that leaked to the public. News had leaked that both Goldberg and Lesnar were leaving WWE after this event, and the notoriously passionate New York crowd was absolutely furious at what they perceived as two sellouts collecting their paychecks before walking out the door. From the opening bell, the crowd booed relentlessly, chanting "You sold out," "Nah nah nah, hey hey goodbye," and even cheering for Hulk Hogan, who wasn't even in the building. The hostility was palpable and suffocating, creating an atmosphere that no wrestling match could possibly overcome. The wrestlers themselves seemed to feed into the negativity, stalling with rest holds and delivering minimal action that only exacerbated the crowd's hostility. Lesnar even flipped off the fans in frustration, and the only cheers of the entire match came for Steve Austin's post-match stunners on both competitors. Goldberg won the match with a spear and jackhammer, but absolutely nobody cared about the result. The catastrophe damaged both careers significantly. Though Lesnar would eventually pivot successfully to UFC, Goldberg's reputation suffered considerably. Backstage, Vince McMahon was reportedly furious, and commentator JBL later noted that the toxic atmosphere represented one of the lowest points he had ever witnessed in professional wrestling. This match marked the end of both competitors' WWE runs for years to come. Speaking of WrestleMania main events that left crowds completely hostile and uninterested, our next disaster involves a coronation that absolutely nobody wanted: Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns. If ever there was a wrestling match symbolizing everything wrong with WWE's booking philosophy under Vince McMahon, it was the Universal Championship main event between Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 34. This match was intended to be Roman Reigns' triumphant coronation, the moment when he would claim the top championship and solidify himself as WWE's undisputed face. Instead, it devolved into a repetitive slog that had the New Orleans crowd doing literally anything other than watching. The match itself consisted primarily of a seemingly endless barrage of suplexes and finishers that went absolutely nowhere. Fans who had rejected Roman Reigns' push for years hijacked the match with chants of boring, "This is awful," Beach Ball Mania, CM Punk, and Rusev Day. The crowd was literally playing with beach balls instead of engaging with the supposed climax of the biggest wrestling event of the year. The disconnect between what WWE wanted fans to feel and what they actually felt could not have been more stark or embarrassing. Lesnar retained unexpectedly after 6 F5s, with Reigns bleeding profusely from a botched spot, leaving the crowd stunned and confused. The catastrophe symbolized WWE's complete failure to read their own audience, alienating fans and stalling Reigns' momentum even further. Controversies swirled over a possible botched finish. Rumors suggested there may have been a referee miscue, and Lesnar's part-time status only added to fan frustration. The drama extended to Roman Reigns' prior matches, where sleeping chants had become a regular feature, amplifying the backlash against his coronation storyline. Speaking of commentator feuds that probably should have stayed in the booth, our next disaster features an announcer who simply could not wrestle: Michael Cole versus Jerry Lawler. Sometimes WWE makes decisions that leave fans scratching their heads in bewilderment, and booking a 14-minute WrestleMania match between two commentators was definitely one of those decisions. The feud between Michael Cole and Jerry the King Lawler had been building for months, with Cole's obnoxious heel antics generating genuine heat. A quick squash match where Lawler destroyed Cole would have been the perfect payoff. Instead, WWE gave us 14 agonizing minutes of rest holds and interference that killed the WrestleMania crowd. The match saw Cole dominate the aging Lawler with rest holds and interference from Jack Swagger, dragging at a pace that would have been slow for a mid-card match, let alone a WrestleMania bout. The crowd died as the interminable action dragged on, with fans actively checking out what should have been a feel-good moment for the beloved Lawler. The match ended in a disqualification victory for Cole via ankle lock, only for the anonymous Raw general manager to reverse the decision, awarding Lawler the victory, but prolonging an angle that absolutely nobody wanted to see continue. With a cage match rating of 0.9, this match holds the dubious distinction of being WrestleMania's lowest-rated match in the history of that database. The catastrophe robbed Lawler of a feel-good WrestleMania moment that he absolutely deserved after decades of service to the company, and it wasted the involvement of Stone Cold Steve Austin as the special enforcer. Controversies centered on the feud's excessive length, while Cole's microphone work was genuinely praised as excellent heel work. The match itself exposed his complete inexperience as an in-ring performer. Backstage heat reportedly followed, with critics calling this the worst feud in WWE history. The drama included Lawler's real frustration over Cole's disrespectful behavior during their program. Speaking of matches that featured supernatural elements that completely fell flat, our next disaster involves maggots, worms, and one of the worst WrestleMania bouts of all time. Randy Orton versus Bray Wyatt. The feud between Randy Orton and Bray Wyatt heading into WrestleMania 33 had been genuinely compelling, featuring supernatural storytelling that included Orton burning down Wyatt's compound in one of the most memorable Raw segments in years. The build-up positioned Wyatt as a legitimate threat and suggested their WWE Championship match would be something truly special. What fans got instead was a match relying on gimmicky projections that looked terrible and buried one of WWE's most promising characters for what felt like the 100th time. The match featured projections of maggots, worms, and cockroaches on the mat, an idea that may have sounded interesting in a creative meeting but failed spectacularly in execution. The visuals looked cheesy and cheap, more likely to elicit laughter than fear or awe. Rather than enhancing the supernatural storytelling, the projections served as a distraction that took viewers out of the match entirely. The bout itself was shockingly short at only 10 minutes, lacking any real heat or drama despite months of build-up. Wyatt dominated briefly before Orton hit an abrupt RKO to win the championship, ending the match in thoroughly anticlimactic fashion. The match was rated 1.2-1 on Cage Match and was voted worst match of 2017 by multiple wrestling publications. This catastrophe effectively killed whatever momentum Bray Wyatt had built, continuing his frustrating pattern of losing whenever it mattered most. Controversies included Orton later taking shots at the bug projections in interviews and debates over WWE's failure to capitalize on a feud that had genuine potential. The drama highlighted Wyatt's sad pattern of being built up only to be torn down at the worst possible moment. Speaking of long-awaited matches that completely failed to deliver, our next disaster involves an 18-month build-up and a botched finish that helped kill an entire wrestling promotion. Hulk Hogan versus Sting. Starrcade 1997 was supposed to be WCW's crowning achievement, the culmination of 18 months of incredible storytelling, transforming Sting into a silent vigilante, seeking vengeance against the NWO and Hollywood Hulk Hogan. The build-up was perfect. Sting descending from the rafters, the iconic crow imagery, the anticipation of finally seeing Hogan get what he deserved. This was the moment that would cement WCW's dominance over WWE in the Monday Night Wars. Instead, it became the beginning of the end. The disaster centered on a completely botched finish. The plan was for Hogan to win via a fast count pin from referee Nick Patrick, which would expose the corruption within WCW and set up Bret Hart to restart the match. But Patrick counted at a completely normal speed, confusing everyone in the arena and at home watching on pay-per-view. The storyline made no sense because the fast count looked like every other 3 count in wrestling history. Bret Hart came out anyway and restarted the match, leading to Sting's submission victory, but the sloppiness of the execution, combined with Sting's rusty performance after taking a year off from active competition, made the entire spectacle feel like a letdown. Fans who had waited 18 months for this moment felt completely robbed of the satisfying payoff they deserved. The catastrophe accelerated WCW's decline, and controversies blamed Hulk Hogan's notorious backstage politics for the botch. Many insiders claimed Hogan deliberately sabotaged the finish to protect his image, though Eric Bischoff has consistently denied this. The drama included Sting's post-match demotion and the beginning of WCW's long slide into irrelevance. Speaking of personal feuds that failed to deliver in the main event, our next disaster features rest holds, slow pacing, and a crowd that was completely exhausted. Triple H vs. Randy Orton. The feud between Triple H and Randy Orton heading into WrestleMania 25 was intensely personal, ignited by Orton's vicious attacks on the McMahon family, including Triple H's wife Stephanie and father-in-law Vince. The storyline had genuine heat, with Orton portrayed as a psychotic predator who had crossed every line. Fans were primed for a brutal WWE Championship match where Triple H would exact violent revenge. What they got instead was 23 minutes of rest holds and slow pacing that killed whatever excitement had been built. The match was hamstrung by a stipulation that stipulated Triple H would lose the title on countout or disqualification, which severely limited the high-impact moves that fans expected from a grudge match of this magnitude. Instead of the violent confrontation the storyline demanded, the competitors worked a methodical, technical match that would have been appropriate for a completely different feud. The pacing was agonizingly slow, with extended rest-hold sequences that sapped whatever energy remained in the building. Making matters infinitely worse, this match was positioned after the legendary Shawn Michaels vs. Undertaker encounter, widely considered one of the greatest WrestleMania matches of all time. The exhausted crowd, emotionally drained from watching a genuine classic, booed the finish when Triple H won with a pedigree. The catastrophe wasted a genuinely hot build-up, with controversies swirling over the stipulation killing the match's momentum and speculation about Triple H's influence in booking decisions. The drama extended the feud unnecessarily, with rematches that failed to recapture whatever magic the storyline once possessed. Speaking of physical mismatches that produced unwatchable results, our next disaster features two giants who simply couldn't work together. Giant Gonzalez versus The Undertaker. WrestleMania 9 is often remembered as one of the worst WrestleMania events in history, and the match between Giant Gonzalez and The Undertaker is a major reason why. The concept seemed straightforward: pit the legendary Undertaker against the 7'7" Giant Gonzalez for a clash of monsters. But what looked interesting on paper became an absolute train wreck, producing one of the ugliest matches in WrestleMania history and proving that size alone cannot compensate for a complete lack of wrestling ability. The match was sluggish from the opening bell, with Gonzalez's limited mobility leading to awkward chops and absolutely zero chemistry between the two performers. Gonzalez could barely move, let alone execute the kind of offense necessary to make a compelling wrestling match. The Undertaker, one of the greatest workers in wrestling history, found himself carrying an opponent who simply could not hold up his end of the bargain.
Man, he would pull me down. He'd grab me by the back of my head. He'd pull me down, and I'm expecting the shot across the shoulder blades. He'd hit me in the back of the neck.
The match ended in a disqualification when Gonzalez resorted to using chloroform on The Undertaker, a finish that was as bizarre as it was unsatisfying. Rated .77 on Cage Match, it remains among WrestleMania's ugliest bouts ever. The catastrophe highlighted 1993's poor booking decisions, with controversies over Gonzalez's inexperience and his ridiculous airbrushed bodysuit gimmick that was supposed to make him look more muscular. This match was part of The Undertaker's monster phase at WrestleMania, where he faced oversized opponents who couldn't deliver compelling matches. The drama included Gonzalez's quick exit from WWE, as the company realized he simply wasn't going to work as a long-term attraction. Speaking of WrestleMania main events that were completely overshadowed by other storylines, our next disaster involves a championship match that nobody cared about: John Cena versus The Miz. The main event of WrestleMania 27 was supposed to be The Miz's crowning achievement, the moment where the former reality TV star proved he belonged in the main event of the biggest show of the year. His WWE Championship defense against John Cena should have been the culmination of everything The Miz had worked for. Instead, the match was completely overshadowed by The Rock's hosting duties and interference, turning The Miz into an afterthought in his own championship match. The match itself was solid but unremarkable, and the focus was never truly on the competitive competitors in the ring. Everything revolved around The Rock, who had returned to WWE after years away and commanded all the attention. The finish saw a double countout that required a restart, but things got worse when The Miz suffered a legitimate concussion from a barricade spot during the match. The Miz appeared visibly dazed for the remainder of the bout, clearly not operating at full capacity. The Rock interfered, hitting The Miz with a rock bottom that allowed Cena to secure the victory. The Miz later revealed that he lost memories of the match entirely and regretted not stopping the match when he realized something was wrong. The catastrophe made The Miz's championship reign feel like a complete afterthought, with controversies centering on The Rock essentially burying the current champion and the company's handling of The Miz's concussion. The drama centered on The Miz's overlooked achievement. He had worked incredibly hard to reach the main event of WrestleMania, only to have his moment stolen by a returning legend. Speaking of women's matches that exposed the division's struggles, our next disaster features two performers who simply weren't ready for WrestleMania. Sable vs. Tori. The women's championship match between Sable and Tori at WrestleMania 15 was supposed to help revive a women's division that had been neglected for years. Instead, it became a 5-minute train wreck, exposing everything wrong with how WWE treated its female performers during the Attitude Era. While other women on the roster were capable workers, Sable and Tori were pushed based on looks rather than in-ring abilities, and WrestleMania 15 made that painfully obvious. The match was absolutely botch-heavy, with Sable reportedly refusing to take bumps and Tori missing moves throughout the brief bout. The chemistry between the two performers was non-existent, and the crowd quickly lost interest in what was happening in the ring. Nothing connected, nothing flowed, and the match felt like an eternity despite only lasting 5 minutes. The finish saw Sable win with a powerbomb that required assistance from Nicole Bass, adding another layer of awkwardness to an already dismal affair. Rated 0.63 on Cage Match, the match exposed the division's neglect and WWE's priorities during this era. The catastrophe stemmed from pushing inexperienced performers into high-profile spots they weren't ready for, with controversies over Sable's ego and backstage issues that would eventually lead to her departure from the company. The drama included Tori's subsequent stalker storyline and the continued struggle for women's wrestling to be taken seriously in WWE for years to come. Speaking of matches that simply failed to engage the audience despite theoretically likable performers, our next disaster takes us back to the cartoonish era of late 1980s wrestling. The Bushwhackers vs. the fabulous Rujos. WrestleMania 5 is fondly remembered for the mega main event between Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, but the undercard featured some absolute stinkers. The tag team match between the Bushwhackers and the fabulous Rujos is perhaps the most egregious example of filler content that had no business being on the grandest stage of them all. What was supposed to be a fun, crowd-pleasing encounter instead became a 5-minute exercise in audience apathy, epitomizing everything wrong with the cartoonish era of 1980s wrestling. The match was a goofy 5-minute affair featuring the Bushwhackers' signature arm-licking antics and minimal actual wrestling. The crowd sat in dead silence as the competitors went through their routines, with nobody in the arena seeming to care about anything happening in the ring. The fabulous Rougeau, who were actually talented workers, were reduced to being foils for comedy spots that simply didn't land. The Bushwhackers won the match with their battering ram finisher after stealing Jimmy Hart's jacket in a spot that was supposed to be comedic but fell completely flat. Rated 1.15 on Cage Match, the match epitomized the worst aspects of 1980s wrestling's cartoonish presentation. The catastrophe was simply a lack of engagement. There were no major controversies or dramatic backstage stories, just a match that had no business being at WrestleMania. A cheeky groin spot raised some eyebrows among the family audience, but otherwise, this match has been largely forgotten, and rightfully so. If you enjoyed this video, click on any of the cards on your screen.